All right. Well, Happy New Year, everybody, and welcome to the first 2021 episode of Perspective Matters This Week in Behavioral Healthcare. My name is Glenn Hadley. I'm your host from Southworth Associates. I want to thank you for joining us today. I hope that you guys are having a fantastic week, a fantastic first week of this new year. And before we get into this week's show, I did want to say if you missed last week's year in review, definitely go back and check that out. You can look and find that on any of our Facebook channels, whether it's the Perspective Matters Facebook page, my Facebook page, YouTube, or LinkedIn, or any other social media channels. You can check that out. It was really neat to go back and see all of the great guests that we had throughout the year through 2020. I invite you to go check that out and any other show. Plus, if you go through the year in review and you see somebody that you were like, wow, I missed that one, and I kind of want to check that out, you can go back and watch it in its entirety. I believe we have all of the shows from last year on our Facebook page for Perspective Matters. So definitely go check that out. Also, for those of you guys that are new to the show, on this show, we address topics in behavioral healthcare that range from clinical, operational, marketing, business development, and we even do some public policy on the show. Our goal is to be a resource to the field and a way to bring mentors to those that are out there on the front lines that are doing the work. So I do want to take a moment and thank our sponsors, Southworth Associates and Dreamscape Marketing. Without them, this show doesn't happen. They make it possible for us to do this every single week and bring you this amazing content. So if you need anything in the intervention space or professional monitoring space or just consulting, you can check out the team at Southworth Associates. We'd love to talk to you about that. If you need anything in the marketing space, especially as it relates to behavioral healthcare, you can talk to the team at Dreamscape Marketing. Make sure that you go check those guys out and thank them for allowing us to do the show. All right. So brings us to our guest today. So let's get into the show. My guest today is Jeff Gould. Jeff is a certified intervention professional and a licensed chemical dependency counselor, intern with 17 years of experience working in the field of behavioral healthcare. Jeff's history in the field includes working with adolescents, global disaster response, and veteran populations alike. Working alongside Sam Davis, Jeff has cut his teeth in intervention work, helping families all over the country using the STORD model. If you guys remember, we had Ed on last year. Really glad to have him be a part of the show. And in addition to this, he's launched a unique and effective coaching program to help treat those that suffer from traumatic brain injury, which I'm really excited to talk about today. Jeff lives in Dallas and is the author of the memoir, A Life Concussed. So I'm really honored to have Jeff with us today. And with that, Jeff, welcome, man. Thanks for being on the show.
Happy New Year, Glenn. And that was quite a warm introduction, and it's good to be here. It's always good to see you. So.
Awesome. So let me ask you this. I always like to start off asking people how they got into this field. So we joke around about it all the time, that it's not something that we wake up and whenever we're a kid and we're like, I think I want to be a fireman or a professional football player. I think I want to work in behavioral healthcare. So how did you get into this deal?
Glenn, that's a great question. I want to tell you, the trajectory of my life has seemingly been, looking back on 17 years, answering a series of timely phone calls that seemed to be by divine appointment. My first real job in I'm 18 years sober, right, in a program. And my first job in recovery was I had been working in pest control, driving around this tanker full of bug poison, listening to Zig Ziglar tapes and Earl Hightower tapes. And I'm an emotional mess. I'm driving around this tanker full of poison, crying half the time, and, but full of joy and gratitude. And I just found it wasn't serving me anymore. And so I had given them their keys back one day and had resigned. And the phone rang about 4 hours later, and an old friend of mine a new friend of mine from the fellowship at the time had asked me if I wanted a job driving a van for county behavioral health. So there was a program at the time, it was called LARC, and it was in Southeast Arizona. It was very much a state funded, they had what they called the wet tank right there, right? And people actually used to, there were a number of people that had expired on site not because the protocol was bad, but because these were the death's doorsteps alcoholic that had about a week of their lifespan left just due to years and years of damage. And sometimes it just so happened that their last week was spent there with people trying to love on them and help them. So it was a very much a bottom of the barrel kind of place to cut your teeth in the field of behavioral health.
Right on. So tell me, like, and as usually happens in this deal, we run into somebody that kind of takes us under their wing and kind of mentors us and brings us into it and kind of opens our eyes to it. So for you, who were the people that really made an impact on you early on?
Glenn, that's such a funny question, and I don't have an intuitive answer for it, because one of the things that happened, so I had come from those of us that were a little bit street, right, when we were in our cups, it takes us a little while to clean up, and that was certainly the case with me. In my first few jobs, I was a guy, I was pretty skinny, and in my shoe, one of my shoelaces might be broken, and I had a couple of tattoos, and I had my supervisors later on tell me, they're like, yeah, when we hired you, we just knew you weren't going to stick. We didn't actually think you'd stick around. And frankly, we didn't think you'd be good for much, and found out you were ripe for promotion, right? I was described as being rocket propelled about 17 years ago. But what I will say in terms of mentorship, I've always really, I'm a keen observer of human behavior, and I've seen so many things in other people that I've tried to emulate. Like, I remember there was a case manager I used to work with. I want to say her name was Sarah, and this was a grant-funded program working with a lot of Desert Storm era veterans. We were running 186 unit program off of 23 separate grants. This is going way, way back. But I remember this woman would have piles and piles and piles of case management work. She would have no less than 8 calls backed up on her line, and just tasks and duties. I mean, just coming out from everywhere. But I remember anytime somebody knocked on her door and said, Sarah, can I talk to you for a second? You got the keen sense that somehow she was able to devote the entirety of her attention to you in a very loving way, and everything was set aside. And I look at someone like that because I get very busy-minded, right? And I'm probably as guilty as anyone of not always giving people the grace and the space that they deserve in my presence when they seem to need something from me. So I would look at things like that and try and emulate them. Patrick Barrasso, learned a great deal from him. Ed Storty is another one. Learned a great deal from him. Some of what I learned from him actually didn't, the basic wisdom and logic in it, some of those things took years to register, but I'm glad they have.
Right on. So, we're going to get into some other stuff, but let me ask you something that's just really important. It's on my mind right now. I know you are a huge hockey fan. And so what's it like being a hockey fan there in Dallas in the South? I mean, are you constantly having to explain the game to people? Because up north, like, people get it. It's a way of life. But like down in the South, are you constantly explaining that?
It fits me perfectly. Ever since, as long as I can remember, Glenn, I was always the iconoclastic kind of kid. I always had to be a little bit different. I was probably in what the 12-step fellowship they would call a character defect. Glenn, I never wanted to fit in. I always wanted to stand out. And so everyone down here's got Dallas Cowboys and Texas Rangers, and I got my Vancouver Canucks bumper sticker. I'm a big Vancouver fan. And so it suits me like a glove. I think the league itself, I wish all sports teams did this. I wish on the Jumbotron, 10 minutes prior to the game, all of the leagues took the time to educate the new viewer. Hey, this is what it is you're going to be looking at. This is an icing. This is a cross-checking. This is why the blue line and the red line is there. I think all sports could do a better job of that. Otherwise, you're taking someone new to the game and they're tapping you like, well, why did that happen? Why did the goalie just leave the ice when the puck is still in play? And things like that. And you're having to stop and explain that. But yeah, I love it. As for how I got into it, somebody picked me up from residential treatment. I had to have about 5 weeks sober and was coming off. I was really, really raw that night. And I remember they brought me to a Division II hockey game. And it was, everything about that night was magical. I mean, we did the anthem, the national anthem. And I remember visually, I could see the city on fire and the sky's red, and they wake up and that flag. I remember just crying. It was like the first time I'd ever heard the song like that. It's the most beautiful thing. And I mean, I was just a mess, right? But I was crying. It was the first time like my spirit had ever taken that song in, and I was an American. And then the play started, and I was watching this thing of grace and beauty, this thing of incredibly fast movement. I'll be honest, it's interesting. I kind of liked the chaos of it in the beginning because I was a chaotic person. Now that I know what a set play looks like and I can tell what they're doing, I appreciate the organization of it, right? Because now I'm an organized individual. So it's been interesting to go through that evolution with the sport and really come full circle.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you sharing that, and I'm glad we could give you a platform to explain the rules to everybody. We desperately need that. But I was thinking, because I'm a big NASCAR fan, and so trying to explain that to people is very similar, and most people just come into it appreciating the wrecks and the collisions, and I think that we see that a lot in hockey too, right? People come in and like love the big hits, and I want to use that to segue into a little bit of what we're talking about today, because one of the things in your history and in what you're doing that's exciting to me is what you're doing with TBI, or traumatic brain injury, and that kind of deal. So tell me a little bit about, and tell the audience a little bit about what you're doing, and how, like, kind of into that vein of TBI and really what it is, you know?
Sure. Well, before sometimes I think the best way to frame a conversation is problem solution. I think ultimately that's the basis of the entirety of our field. And so, Glenn, I have about 14, 15 years of working in a residential setting or an extended care setting in some way, shape, form, or fashion. So I've worked with a lot of young adults, thousands, if we're telling the truth, if we're putting numbers on it. And again, I'm a keen observer of human behavior. And so one of the things I've noticed over the years certainly is every once in a while, you get the ones that are hard to help, right? And I've seen a lot of those. And I kind of described the guy to you. Maybe his hygiene is a little poor. Maybe he's the guy that stares off into space and group, and it doesn't really seem like anything's connecting with him. Maybe he's the guy that when it's his turn on the chores list, does a pretty poor job of getting the dishes and the floor. And I mean, you can still visually see the stains and the crusted food on the thing. And now the community's starting to gang up on him and pick at him and peck at him, and he needs an advocate. And sometimes you go look in a chart for a guy like that, whether there's a PHP or a clinical director, and we share information internally, and it's like, oh, he was in a motorcycle accident 3 years ago. He had 50 staples in his head and was in a coma for 3.5 weeks. And so I've seen that person time and time again. I don't have any outcome studies on TBI, comorbidity co-occurring with SUD, but I'm going to imagine they're pretty poor. And so what we're really talking about is a guy that has cognitive deficits that isn't allowing him to be in the room he's in. Think of it, you or I or anyone that's gone through treatment. Picture going through 3 months of treatment with your AirPods in. That's probably roughly what it's like, more or less, to be, although there's so many different presentations of traumatic brain injury, which for the listener, if you don't know, TBI, traumatic brain injury, and it could also just be BI, which would be non-traumatic, right? Sometimes enough drugs or things can also have serious BI, serious cognitive effects, but for all intents and purposes, we'll call it TBI. So we have a part of the population, and I've worked in a lot of those programs, for our insurance-based programs. If you do enough Xanax, enough opioids, enough cocaine or alcohol, somebody is going to take you, right? Your insurance is going to pay for that. But it just so happens in this case, you're always kind of an ANDA, right? He's alcoholic and profoundly dyslexic. In this case, he's alcoholic or substance use disorder would be the new terminology. But it just so happens that he also has a, TBI. And in my experience, Glenn, most treatment centers would just cross their fingers and hope for the best. I was talking to somebody from a profoundly wonderful treatment program. I'm not going to mention their name here, but if I mentioned it, everyone would nod their head in agreement. Yeah, they're great at what they do. And even they said, we always get a recovery coach to help them with their checkbook and help them kind of open their mail and take them to yoga and help them grocery shopping. It's clear that person needs the extra help. But even those people, they don't know anything about brain injury either. So we have a person with limited cognitive functioning trying to function in a world with CBT and DBT and 12-step and accountability and scheduling and functioning. And so I have added a sports psychologist to our team who specializes in this, wrote a book on the said subject matter, have read peer-reviewed journal after thing. And we do a lot of work with meditation. We do a lot of work with linguistics. We do a lot of work with nutrition that repairs myelin, which is a part of the basis of brain injury. We have a nutritionist on our team as part of this coaching model. And then I'm very, very familiar with there's a number of things from TMS to hyperbaric pressure treatment to biofeedback to neurofeedback to the big one that I'm really keen on. A lot of people aren't aware of this, but there's your pituitary gland. To me, it's about the size of a cashew. If you could go about 3 inches back behind your eye sockets, it sits right there. And believe it or not, even though it's tucked back in there pretty good, it's a very vulnerable part of the brain. And so oftentimes in head injury, that's one of the first things to kind of get rocked, is that pituitary gland. And that controls all the hormones in your body. So when your hormones get wrecked, you're going to see these highs and these lows and this suicidal behavior and this suicidal thought life. And all of that is basically just due to, I went to explain it to somebody. Sorry, Glenn, you let the dog off the leash on this one because I love talking about it. I was explaining it to somebody the other day. If you were to wreck your car into a brick wall and you look beneath it, it's like, we got a lot of fluid here. Is it brake fluid? Is it power steering fluid? Is it transmission fluid? And the answer is maybe we don't know what it is. What we do know is it ain't in the right place anymore. And sometimes getting a concussion when you see those, what almost appears to be bipolar afterwards, what you're really seeing is a damaged pituitary gland and a hormone imbalance that has resulted in this wide array of drastic emotions. That, believe it or not, can be treated pretty easy. It's just most people don't actually know about that. So part of our work is consulting and putting together a treatment plan with neuro services and pharmacological intervention. And the rest is a bunch of light duty cognitive exercises you can do at home. And we basically shepherd people into good health and help them get through their treatment program, help them get through their sober living program, try and improve cognitive functioning, even if it's just by maybe 1 or 2%, and just bring those cognitive levels up so they can absorb what's being asked of them in treatment. Near as I can tell, there are drastic improvements in neurology, in basic neurology all the time. But in the substance abuse treatment field, this is a lacking and needed service. And so labor of love intervention kind of fills that niche. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this, because I've worked a lot with underfunded or no funded populations over my career. And the way that the first 2 or 3 steps in working with them are very different from the more affluent population. For a person that's coming off the street, some of the first steps are very, very basic survival skills, right? We're looking at how can this person provide for themselves. And so like getting them hooked up with medication management, getting them hooked up with, in some cases, just a driver's license, how to work and care for themselves. Those are paramount before getting into some of the more nuanced recovery skills later. So in this situation, working with somebody with a TBI that's presenting, what are some of the differences in that approach as opposed to normal standard substance use treatment? What are some of the differences in the steps?
It can look like so many different things. So I think that's why, in essence, you're kind of creating a concierge coaching program, because different head injuries are going to result in a wildly different presentation from person to person. with some people, it's very much going to look like a mood disorder, whereas other people, it's very much going to look like maybe their mood is okay, but there's massive, motor skill repair loss. I found this profound. I found this interesting much, much earlier in my study of this. There's people, in the ICU that have been in a car accident, that there's specialized coaches. These are neuro people that have to teach you how to swallow again. I didn't know it was possible to not remember how to swallow. Oh, it's absolutely possible. And so it could be anywhere in between. Obviously, we have to pick and choose the people that we really think we could be helpful with. There's going to be some motivational interviewing or something that resembles that involved, certainly, because we're talking about the very hard to help. There needs to be some level of willingness to kind of accept the help being offered and basically engage some coaching on some level. So the challenges are many. There's too scattered a field to tell you what those exactly are. I've taken some people on that and everybody was just a little bit different challenge. So that one's a hard question to speak to, but I appreciate it. So.
Yeah, I think that we see that often in our field that, people coming in for any type of recovery service, and I'm not just speaking about substance use recovery, I'm talking about any recovery service. They're so nuanced. Each person is. We're talking about the brain. It's going to be very nuanced. That I can appreciate that it is a challenge. And once again, on the show, we like to talk about this wide doorway into recovery, that it's not just one size fits all. It's many sizes fit many people. And so I can appreciate that. What are some of the, let me just ask you, what are some of the challenges that you've seen in doing interventions with people with traumatic brain injury?
Oh, the first one that really got me, I'm going to be honest with you, I'd taken on a case in Virginia, and I had to take supervision around the case, just within weeks, because I had been brought out to Virginia to do an intervention with a family where the oldest of their two children, who's still very much a young adult, had kind of put their fists up and punched mom a little bit, and had taken some hallucinogenics that weekend. And it turns out had been smoking pot for a year. And they called me and just said, can you be here tomorrow? And we'll kind of work it out when we get here. So in the interim, I had arrived at this family's home, come to find out this person was an adult. So technically they hadn't run away, but it looked a bit like, they had taken off, right? And we're now kind of missing, and sending nasty texts to the family. Me and my friends are going to go to Florida, and you're never going to see me again. And we're going to make a sex tape. I mean, it was really peculiar. And so in sitting down with this family, and I was really looking for that big T, little t trauma thing, right? And so, because I was saying, well, a year of pot abuse and taking hallucinogenics and getting violent one time, there's certainly some substance abuse there, but in terms of substance use disorder, what we would call addiction, like the real McCoy, right? That wasn't resonating with me with that particular case, but I was saying, but there's something. And so I'm just asking questions and write notes after notes after notes. Was there something tragic, some kind of abuse, something you may not even known about? Was this person? And just trying to go through, like really looking for that little t or big T trauma, accumulation of it. And it was plain as day in front of my face. I had almost have failed to assemble the data in real time about this auto accident that had happened 9 months before. And there was significant speed involved. The officers, based on the tire tracks, thought that this was about a 90-mile-an-hour car collision.
Oh, wow.
And so I think I had failed to see that result. I'll tell you who did see it. We were able to get this person to Amen Clinic in Virginia. And those people are like the best of the best, right? I mean, they truly do amazing work. And they were able to take some imaging, right, some scanning, and could clearly pinpoint what the problem and where all that aberrant behavior came from. But sometimes that's always the most challenging cases are the ones where oftentimes there's methamphetamine abuse. Those are always, you're literally intervening on somebody that almost barely can make a decision, let alone understand what's being said without wild layers of delusion and paranoia. So the methamphetamine ones are hard. Anytime there's a co-occurring comorbidity with a bipolar type 2, that's always going to be really, really difficult for you. So yeah, some of those things.
Right on. And I appreciate you bringing up and mentioning the family earlier. And I always like to talk about family involvement, because when we take someone out of an environment and give them tools and equip them to do life and to walk into a new way of living, and then send them right back to the same environment with no changes, it's a recipe for disaster. And so talk to me a little bit about the importance of working with families. And you can speak in terms of a regular intervention, but also in terms of a more nuanced intervention that may include a TBI. What does that look like, and how do you include the family?
Well, Glenn, I'm pretty straightforward. There's a lot of I don't know, new methodology and new models, and people are changing and adapting their business. One of the things that's become very common, and I would like to express neutrality on the topic. I mean, I probably have some thoughts on it, but not that I'm really willing to share publicly, is some people sort of on board with their intervention case management for a year. And sometimes it's profoundly needed. There's other cases where I don't know if it's needed or not. I like to pick and choose my programs, right, where our identified patient is going to be going, to where they don't need, the programs always ask me that you send someone there, and they said, what's the level of involvement you would like in terms of phone calls, emails, release of information, all that. And my basic answer is call me if something's on fire, right? And the reason I tell them that is that's why I've chose you, because I don't want to I want to choose programs that are good enough to where I don't feel I have to micromanage it, right? If you were talking about some, again, we won't name drop here. I don't know that it's appropriate, but I know who I think of when a program that's solid enough with the family, with the identified patient. If there needs to be, if there's going to be some kind of ASA or AMA situation, I know that they have the staff and the manpower to manage it beautifully and do the best job. Those are the programs I want to kind of refer to. I also, having said that, I like programs that are small enough to where if there is a problem, I can get the CEO, I can get the clinical director, because we have a personal relationship on the phone at about 9:30 at night. That's where my comfort level lies in making referrals. With the family, I try and cram all my education into about the first week or so. I generally anywhere from 2 to 7 days based on a risk assessment and some questions I ask the family. It kind of sets the pace for how much time do we have here without being without putting the identified patient at risk, right? So I'll ask the family, does this person own a handgun? Are they mixing hypnotics with benzodiazepines, with opiates, so on and so forth? Do they have a history of domestic violence? How often do they drive? How often are they left alone? And I kind of score this matrix I built up, and if the score is more than 25, it's like, hey, I have a duty to inform you. It's a high risk of fatality here. Probably has been for a while. And so I let that set the tone of the thing, and then just try and pack in, as much education as you can get in 2 or 3 days time, and build your team. One of the things I found was supporting the family after, our team has added Brian Percox. He's a director of family services, and we have about 10 or 12 weeks of written family curriculum, and he works with them beautifully. One of the things I've found, and I would ask the listener to ask themselves this question as well. In the 18 years I've been in the program, how often do we recommend Al-Anon? I'm going to just take a gander at it. 900 times, 1,000 times, 2,000 times in 18 years. And out of those 2,000, let's call it what it is, in our 12, our 12 core principles and our global criteria. In essence, you can kind of call that a referral, right? You're taking somebody that needs a service and sending them to that service. Okay, so out of the 900 times I've suggested it, how many times has the family come back and 6 months later and said, that really hit the spot, changed my life. I'm a whole new man. We have a whole new perspective, attitude, and outlook on that. I'm going to say again, maybe 5.
Yeah.
And that is not a slam on Al-Anon. Some of my best friends right now, I love Al-Anon family groups. The problem is regionally, some places it's strong, some places are not. We like to tell people, try about 5 or 6 different meetings. But for all we know, all 6 of them that they tried may or may not have been great. And so this is the one area where we're constantly recommending a service, and we very regionally have no idea what that service necessarily looks like on the other side. And very, very rarely does it land well. That's just my experience with recommending it. And so we actually created our own family curriculum. It's completely set aside, and this is no longer about focusing on the identified patient. So I basically work with the families on the front end and the patients, and if the family really needs that extra help, and oftentimes they do, we have them connect with Brian, and Brian, I will pump his tires a little bit. He's the best I've ever seen with families. He's so good and so patient with families. It doesn't matter if they're in a panic, and give him a flurry of 22 calls in a week. He'll answer each and every one. And in my experience, he'll give every single call the time it deserves, even if it's 10 minutes or 20 minutes or 25 minutes. And so, yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I agree. Knowing Brian myself, he does have a way of working with families. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So we're going short on time. I did want to ask you though, before we wrap it up, I did want to see what's new on your horizon. Is there anything that excites you or fires you up, or anything that you want to leave the audience with today?
Well, I don't know that what fires me up. So it's a beautiful fall in Dallas, right? We're at the end of COVID, and I just couldn't stand to be inside another day, and the weather was so beautiful. It's like, but what am I going to do? Go stand out on the lawn and just stand there? And so I'm always been a city boy, but I went to Cabela's and bought myself a fishing rod, and we're like 12 weeks later, and I've got like 2 deep sea fishing rods, 1 bait caster, 3 tackle box, I just, everything I do. But I start off my mornings on the pond, and I got some music and a thermos full of hot coffee, and whether I catch anything or not is irrelevant. I'm sitting with the spirit of the universe, watching the sun come up on the water, and just kind of watching the morning birds, the water birds do their thing. And it's been fantastic. I do want to leave everyone with the thought that if you haven't been aware of this, we're in a pandemic within a pandemic, right? And so I think it's important that we all, of course, take care of ourselves so we can bring our A game, because I think the numbers, once all the people that are really suffering and have suffered as a result of depression, as a result of unemployment, as a result of having lost their business, they're still going to keep coming. We're going to see the after effects of this pandemic for years to come, as they kind of wash up on the shores of, our call sheets and our fellowships and things like that. And so I just ask that everyone be good to themselves, be kind to themselves, take extra good care of yourself, because you're going to be taking care of more people than you can possibly imagine if you aren't already. I mean, our calls have been up, I don't know, 500%. I don't have a percent. They've been up a great deal. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to echo that. And I just want to thank you for being a part of the show and coming on and sharing your perspective and your experience. I'm really fired up about the work that you're doing with the TBI patients. So thank you for being a part of that. I do want to let everybody know out there, if you want to get in touch with Jeff, that there's his number and an email. And I encourage everybody to reach out to the guests on the show. Reach out to Jeff if you have a question about working with a traumatic brain injury patient and what they're doing at Labor of Love. Definitely reach out and say hello to them and just talk and continue the conversation for sure. So Jeff, I really appreciate it. So take that down real quick. And then before we go, I do want to thank our sponsors, Southworth Associates and Dreamscape Marketing. I put their websites up there. Please go to the sites and check them out, and thank them for allowing us to really bring this content to you guys. And if you have a potential guest for the show, or you'd like to be a part of Perspective Matters in any way, or you would like to have a conversation about anything that we do at Southworth Associates, you can reach out to me at glenn@southworthassociates.net. And remember, that's Glenn with 2 N's, very important, at southworthassociates.net. We'd love to talk with you guys about that. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to close the show today. Next week's guest is going to be Tara Holbrook. And I'm really excited to have Tara on talking about this new project that she's working on. We're really excited to hear from Tara. And I do want us all to remember this, that as we come together and ring in this new year, just remember that everybody has their own story. Everybody's got their own point of view. And sometimes it can be different from ours. And just because our point of view is different, or what they're sharing doesn't necessarily resonate with our experience, remember, it isn't right or wrong. It's just a matter of perspective. And so I just want to leave you guys with that today. Jeff, thank you so much for being on the show, and we'll see you guys next week.
All right. Thank you, Glenn.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.